Welcome to Sinister Heroes. I'm your host, Danny Iniquitous. Thank you for tuning in. If you're new to the channel, this is a channel about Dungeons and Dragons where we try and take a darker tone with everything we do here. So if you like edgy kind of content, hit that like and subscribe button. Please check us out on Patreon. Thank you so much to our Patreon supporters. We love you guys. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. And a big thank you to our good friends at Dice Legion. Use the promo code Sinister and get 10% off all of your purchases. Great for the holidays. Also, both of the link of those are in the description, as well as the link to our live stream game that we are in with a bunch of good friends of ours. It's called Critical Failures. Definitely check us out. With all that out of the way, we're going to talk about the Playtest 8 Druid. The new Druid that they put out for the Playtest 8 didn't change a huge amount, but they did go really in depth with a couple of explanations and some things that I think that are really good about wildshape. And I think it's very important to note. Be aware we have covered the 1D&D Playtest Druids a bunch of times as they've been released. So if I recover something in depth, I've tried to keep it as close as possible to the previous version if nothing really has changed, but you might hear some things that are a little bit repetitive in case you did watch that video recently. So at first level, you're going to get Druidic, which is your specialized language, and you can leave Druidic message to other Druids and pick up on their messages out in the world, and you always have the Speak with Animals spell prepared. It doesn't say that that spell counts towards your spells learned or anything. I'm assuming it doesn't. I feel like it's kind of a necessity if this is kind of the feel that they're going for. If you're going to be DMing and someone has a Druid, use this if they ever have any interaction with their backstory or their order or their circle or anything, because it really ties them into the world. Otherwise, it kind of feels like the Druids just kind of exist on their own. And there's a lot of rich history with Druids and Druidic entities throughout a lot of fantasy, and you kind of miss that connection to it if you don't put something like this in the game. It doesn't have to be huge, it doesn't have to be involved, but if you're playing a game, one of the best things that I think all DMs should do is try and incorporate the backstories of the individual characters into some facet of the overarching story. It could be the beginning, the middle, towards the end, or whatever it is. Space it out. Just get something that connects them to that main plot line, so that way everyone has their chance and their opportunity to be invested and want and care about what's going on, as opposed to feeling like they kind of just happen to be doing whatever's going on. And that makes a big difference when you pull their backstory and you pull their maybe they have love interest or a character and they're now in the story. That changes the dynamic. It's not just a touchstone from memory depicting on how they would normally act. It's something that can influence the current gameplay and change their mentality and perceptions. It's a great tool. It often goes unnoticed, and I can't tell you how easy the Druid makes that work, because it puts it in and it makes you connected to other Druids, and no matter what, if you use it, it creates this world of Druids and their orders and their circles, and they're real and tangible. I can't say it enough. Please let your Druids have this. It can be important. Secondly, you get a new thing called Primal Order. You dedicate yourself to one of the following sacred roles of your choice. You can choose either Magician or Warden. Magician, you know, one extra cantrip from the Druid spell list, which is actually pretty good. In addition, your mystical connection to nature gives you bonus to your intelligence check, which is a nature check, equal to your wisdom modifier. When it says bonus to your intelligence and then parentheses nature checks, I would discuss with your DM and make sure that that's not just a suggestion, that's tangible, because investigation, arcana is both intelligence checks, considering investigation and how perception kind of almost works in tandem with it. I could find a reason for that to work together and for you to gain that bonus, but again, that has to do with you. You're a Druid. You also know a lot about magic, as it's a huge part of what you do. I can see wisdom being part of that arcana check. So definitely discuss that with your DM, and even yourself. Consider who else you have in your party. If you do have a wizard, I would step away from arcana. That's knowing magic is kind of their thing. If you have like an inquisitive rogue, maybe you don't need investigation then. Try and just balance that out so it makes a lot of sense. And then secondly, you get warden. Trained for battle, you gain martial weapon proficiency and armor training with medium armor. Now, with medium armor and a shield, you already can have a pretty high AC. You can rock out at about 18, 19 if you have like a +2 to dex. The key thing about this is if you have martial weapon proficiency, I'm expecting you to get some sort of extra attack or a subclass that gives you extra attack. I expect there's going to be some cool stuff that's coming out with the Druid, or maybe like a better revamping of the Spores Druid, because maybe grabbing a pike or something is going to be something that's really viable for you. Secondly, armor training with medium armor. Now, previously, Druids weren't supposed to wear any kind of metal armor. I thought that didn't really make a lot of sense because metal is just part of nature. You didn't fabricate metal out of nothing. It came from refining stone. In a similar process, you refine leathers. It's not that smithing and leatherworking are very similar. It's just that you do change the material into something more valuable by doing something to it. So I thought that really didn't make a lot of sense, but it doesn't say that you're limited to that. So I'm pretty sure they're keeping that. You can wear any medium armor, which is great. So at second level, you still gain Wild Companion, where you can use an expense of Wild Shape to cast Find Familiar without any material components. And when you cast a spell in this way, the familiar is Fey, and disappears when you finish a long rest. What's interesting to note is that it's Fey. So that means certain things that target humanoids don't target them because they're not Fey. It is interesting because it doesn't necessarily say that it speaks, but you do have speak with animals, so you can communicate with it if you did wish. But ultimately, depending on how versatile you are personally with Find Familiar, it can either be awesome for you or it can be kind of a complete waste. You kind of need to be good with using Find Familiar in general to really want to use it, or especially to expand the use of Wild Shape. But that depends on you and what you're trying to build. I get it. Druids, forest people, nature wizards, you want a bird or something. I get it. And it makes sense. It does. But I personally don't tend to use Find Familiar a huge amount. So for me, I think Wild Shape is a little bit more valuable in what it can do. And Wild Shape is a little bit more interesting. So one of the design notes says that the creature statistics for the 2024 Player's Handbook, which is going to be 1D&D, I believe, will include more beast options than the 2014 book. Now, that doesn't mean that you're limited to that. It all comes down to beasts from within the game, which is a good, interesting choice. As they produce more and more monster manuals and campaigns, there'll be more monsters. Some of them will be beasts, which will give you some other options. But I'm pretty sure you have a fairly large option already. So, in regards to Wild Shape, some of the things I think is important to note is that it's now as a bonus action across the board for everyone. Secondly, you stay in that form for a number of hours equal to half your Druid level, which I think is the same as it was before, or until you use Wild Shape again, or have the incapacitated condition, or die. You can also leave the form early as a bonus action. Here's something I think is really important to note. One of the things that you do get is temporary hit points when you use your Wild Shape. It's stated that you assume your Wild Shape form, you gain a number of temporary hit points equal to your Druid level. Once those temporary hit points are expended, you are still in Wild Shape. It is no longer until that animal passes or dies because of damage or bringing their hit points to 0. It is now a permanent thing for the duration of that time. that changes the dynamics of how wild shape works. And take into consideration one of my favorite subclasses in the game, the Spore Druid, it would follow along those same lines. So you would have Spore Druid for hours on end, which would be wild. Given that as it is, I think that's a really strong buff for the Druid. And maybe it was there the whole time and I just didn't really go in depth into it because it's wild shape and it tends to be really complicated. But that is a big dynamic change, or a big thing that has to be noticed and has to be understood, which is very powerful. I think that really brings the Druids to a next level. And I think it really emphasizes that kind of shape-shifting entity. Because now you can just creep around as like a were-rat or just a rat or general and just do all the scouting, be in tandem with the rogue when he goes out so he's not by himself, or be a giant scorpion or whatever it is for hours, and still be able to kind of do what you think. But I think it's kind of a nerf at higher levels, but once you hit level 20, it's a whole different thing. The game statistics. Your game statistics replaced by the statistics of your beasts, but you retain your hit points, hit dice, intelligence, wisdom, charisma scores, class features, language, and feats. You also retain your skill and saving throw proficiencies and use your proficiency bonus for them, in addition to gaining those of the creatures. So you can get strength or constitution, whatever it is that the creature you happen to have is actually using. And if the creature has the same proficiency as you, but the bonus in its stat block is higher than yours, use the creature's bonus instead of yours. And you don't have any legendary layer actions if the creature does. Which is interesting because I don't think any of the beasts that you were eligible to use had many layer actions. But that is interesting to note because that means you might be getting new beasts anyway, which is great. It clarifies spellcasting. You can't cast spells when you're in beast form, but if you have a concentration going, you can still do that spell, which is great. Objects depends on if you have hands or not, but and that's really kind of how wild shape is. Wild resurgence. This might have been there before, but I think it's worth noting again. If you have no uses of wild shape left, you can give yourself one by expending a spell slot, no action required. You can do so only once per turn. In addition, when you expend one use of wild shape to give yourself a level 1 spell slot, you can't do so again until you finish a long rest. So you have a little bit of waning and waxing, ebb and flow to what you can do with your spell slots and use them in a more creative kind of resource, which is great depending on the subclass that you're using. If you're very wild shape dependent, Circle of the Moon, Spores Druid, that stuff makes a huge difference and impacts your gameplay. Maybe you don't need that first level spell slot. Maybe you can obviously gain more out of an additional wild shape. At level 7, you get Elemental Fury. I'm pretty sure I've covered this before, but it is great. The might of the elements flows through you. You gain one of the following options of your choice. Potent spellcasting, you add your wisdom modifier to the damage you deal with any druid cantrip. And Primal Strike. Once on each of your turns, when you hit a creature with an attack roll using a weapon or a beast form's attack in wild shape, you can cause the target to take an extra 1d8 cold, fire, lightning, or thunder damage you choose when you hit. I think that's great. I think there's something for everybody here. I think you could be a melee druid casting cantrips because of Primal Savagery, and then you take any kind of ranged damage dealing cantrip that you have, and you can add on your wisdom modifier, and it scales extremely well. Primal Strike does really great at just adding that 1d8, so you kind of feel like a cleric with one of the melee classes where they get that Divine Strike where they deal additional damage when they hit. You automatically learn Commune with Nature at level 9, which is pretty regular. You get improved Elemental Fury at 15. 15 is a level that a lot of campaigns can end at, so you will see this somewhat often. For potent spellcasting, when you cast a druid cantrip with a range of 10 feet or greater, the spell's range increases by 300 feet. Thorn Whip has 15 feet range. You can now rock out at 300 feet for that, which personally I think is cool. Primal Strike, the damage increases to 2d8. So say you're a spore druid and you're using a pike. So you have range, it's 1d10. It's now 1d10 plus 8 plus whatever your modifier is. Or if you're anyone that's in that beast form, that 2d8 gets added to your attack. So depending on what creature you use, they might have a high regular attack, something 2d10, something crazy. 2d10 plus the modifier plus 2d8. That's a pretty hefty attack. And God forbid you crit. That might be devastating. And at level 18, you can cast spells while in beast form, except for any spell that has a material component with a cost specified, or that consumes its material component. That makes a lot of sense. It's a little high level for that, but again, considering what you can do with beasts and depending on your subclasses, while in your wild shape, you can do some intense things already. So adding spells on top of that is pretty important. At level 20, they did change Archdruid, which is a little bit of a bummer for me. But again, at level 20 is a thing that very rarely do people see. So you gain the following benefits. You gain Evergreen Wild Shape. Whenever you roll initiative and have no uses of Wild Shape left, you regain 1 expended use of it. Nature Magician, you can convert uses of Wild Shape into a spell slot, no action required. Choose a number of your unexpended uses of Wild Shape and convert them into a single spell slot, with each use contributing 2 spell levels. You must then finish a long rest before you can do so again. For example, you can convert 2 uses of Wild Shape and produce a level 4 spell. And then Longevity, the primal magic that you wield causes you to age more slowly. For every 10 years that pass, your body ages only 1 year. That, again, is kind of a, we call that a ribbon feature, or it's kind of just like an NPC feature, or just something storyline-wise. Like if you had a druid that finished a campaign, and you wanted to play him again, and the campaign takes place at a later time, it can be the same druid because he will live long enough to be able to do that. But a lot of the times, this is kind of just like an ending kind of a story thing. For whatever it is your goal is, or your purpose is, this kind of shows that. So it's kind of like a stepping off point for the end of your character. Again, you're at level 20, so that's kind of a lot anyway. The only subclass they show is the Circle of the Moon Druid. You do get a couple of things new that are kind of worth mentioning. You do get circle spells, so these are spells that are always prepared for you. Some of the things that is interesting to note is Cure Wounds, Moonbeam, Vampiric Touch, and I'll get into that just a little bit further down the line. Your circle forms, your actual wild shape forms, are cooler, basically. So the way you convert what level of challenge rating monster beast you can transform into goes back to the same way it was previously for Circle of the Moon, which is your druid level divided by 3 rounded down. That'll give you a wide variety as you go further up in levels and what kind of monster beast you can transform into. Your AC, your armor class, equals 13 plus your wisdom modifier until you leave the form. This is also really important because it emphasizes how important it is to bump that wisdom score. You could have an 18 AC on a beast, and that makes a big difference because normally they have a bunch of hit points and their AC is pretty low. That is really good. That having an 18 AC is pretty impressive. Keep in mind what other things you might get with magic items and how they transfer over and whatever. Temporary hit points, you gain a number of temporary hit points equal to 3 times your druid level. So whenever you transform into a beast, as opposed to getting, say, at level 3, it's 3 temporary hit points, you now get 9. That helps you with your longevity, and that's pretty important. Now, at level 6, you get improved circle forms. While in your wild shape form, you gain both of these benefits. Lunar Radiance, each of your attacks in wild shape can deal its normal damage type or radiant damage. You make this choice each time you hit with those attacks. I'll be honest with you, at level 6, because of magical resistances, physical resistance, you'll start seeing enemies that are resistant to physical damage, bludgeoning, piercing, slashing, most of which is what your beast is normally going to do. So you can add this on to do Radiant to compensate for that, And keep in mind, you do still have your elemental fury that's still doing elemental damage on top of that at the next level, because that comes in at 7. Here's the kicker: increased toughness. You add your wisdom modifier to your constitution saving throws. Now, as a beast, why would you use a lot of con saving throws? What would be so important that you would need constitution saving throws? At level 5, you get Vampiric Touch. Vampiric Touch is a melee spell attack that does necrotic damage that heals you for half the damage dealt. It does. If you cast that and then turn into your wild shape form, you can keep casting that spell. That's important. That gives you a lot of longevity. That keeps you going forward. Moonbeam is another concentration spell that you can cast beforehand and keep maneuvering it around. This doesn't constitute to other spells that do similar functions, but being able to have a pretty decent con score, and then additionally adding your wisdom modifier on top of it, can basically state that you're going to survive those con saves and you're going to keep these spells going. And I think this speaks volumes to the Moon Druid not just being a melee fighter. You're incorporating spells in a very cool facet that supports you passively and gives you encouragement to have these things up. You might not need to throw Vampiric Touch every time it's up on your turn. You might want to do a regular attack, especially at higher levels, because you might be doing regular damage. But having it beforehand, maybe you got hit and maybe you took that and bonus actioned into your attack, means you can alternate using that. Keep in mind, sometimes you don't need to regain HP every round, but it can make a difference having that option, especially considering you might consistently have it up for a very long period of time. The caveat with Vampiric Touch is you have to be a caster to use it. Warlocks, wizards, I think certain clerics, but that might be just like homebrew clerics, but you have to be melee. You have to be up close. That is very dangerous for a caster. And you get that spell at level 5, it's a 3rd level spell, I think. That's a big risk. You can regenerate all that with a nice, healthy cushion and survive and bring your back up as far as humanly possible because of that increased bonus to your con save. I think that's kind of the purpose. At level 10, you gain Moonlight Step, which is, again, it's a magical teleportation you can use as a bonus action, and you have advantage on your next attack roll you make before the end of this turn. And you can use this feature a number of times equal to your Wisdom modifier. You gain all expended uses after a long rest, and you can you also regain uses by expending a spell slot level 2 or higher, each of which you want to restore. So that's 2 spell slot levels for each use of Moonlight Step. At 14th level, you get Lunar Form. This, I think, might be new, but it's pretty great. Again, 15th level being something that you're going to see in a bunch of campaigns, so you might see this regularly. Druid is one of those classes that if you go into, it's really good if you stay into, because the way of all the abilities work with wild shapes and all the subclass abilities requiring Druid levels for X whatever, if you have a Druid, usually they kind of rock all the way through. But at 14th level, the 2 improvements to circle forms is improved Lunar Radiance. Each of your attacks in wild shape form deals an extra 1d10 radiant damage per hit. On top of that, at level 15, they'll be doing an extra 2d8 on top of that. So if you hit, say, 1d10, that's 1d10 plus 1d10 plus 1d8, and then at level 15, 2d8. So if you crit, that's 4d10 plus 4d8, all of which can be different elemental types. It can be radiant and with your choice of fire, thunder, or lightning, or cold. Which is great. That's a huge bonus that brings your offense pretty far ahead, considering a lot of the beasts do have pretty decent attack and special things that they can do. And now you have shared Moonlight. Whenever you use Moonlight Step, you can also teleport one willing creature. That creature must be within 10 feet of you, and you teleport it to an unoccupied space you can see within 10 feet of your destination space. That hasn't really changed, but still, that's a great way to get someone who can escape into a better place, which can be very cool to be a little bit heroic in combat. With all that said and done, I every time I do something to the Druid, I get a little worried because I really do like the Druid. I really had a lot of fun playing a Druid when I did play one, and it is interesting to see where they're going with. I like some of the nods they're making to being able to be in melee and use offensive abilities. I like the idea that they're now at least pushing certain things to be more universal, to be not just one thing, like Circle of the Moon, not just being run up there as a bear and attack something. You're now still a druid, and it's encouraged for you to still use spells and be creative about setting them up beforehand and then turning into wild shape. I love that idea. I think it balances out a lot of things, giving you a range option as well, as you are pretty much melee. When you're in your wild shapes, it encourages stronger offensive unities and with your attacks and your abilities. It's a great class. I understand that wild shape can be kind of difficult to understand and wrap your head around, and I think that's the big thing holding the druid back. But the druid is a lot of fun to play with, and it's worth breaking down and understanding wild shape in order to play it. You can do so much, and they're a lot of fun. That being said, we're going to bring this video to a close. If you made it this far, like, subscribe. Definitely hit us up in the comments. We'd love to hear from you guys. Big thank you to our Patreon supporters. We love you guys. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. And a big thank you to our good friends at Dice Legion. Use the promo code Sinister, get 10% off all of our purchases. And check us out Wednesday night. We are live. Critical Failures. We do it, and it's great. We have a lot of fun with it. Check us out. The link for that is in the description. And thank you for giving a spooky kid a chance.